Coming up on show 511, Tesla's secret battery lab, BMW's enduring love for diesel, and the world's biggest wind turbine to charge your EV with. Well, those stories, and frankly many, many more, coming up on today's podcast. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you are in the world. Welcome to EV News Daily, Thursday, 27th of June today. My name is Martyn Lee, and I go through every EV story to save you time. Thank you, as always, to the Patreon supporters of this show. A new one being you, Robin. A new executive producer, Robin. That would be you, Robin Tanner. Thank you very much, Robin Tanner, for being an exec producer. $10 or more. You are buying me a super posh coffee once a month, except I don't spend it on coffee. We spend it on things like keeping the podcast going. Thank you very much to everyone who has sent me messages over the last couple of days as well, and for those reviews that are coming in. It really helps promote the show. Welcome to heatwave Europe, where it's currently too hot to even drive fast in places like Germany. No, I'm serious. The Autobahn has had a speed limit put on it for the whole thing, unlike parts of the Autobahn which are unrestricted, just because the tarmac's melting. Yeah, and I'm stinking hot as well today. Out the back of the... Long-time listeners will know I record the podcast from the back of a converted garage. Half of it left for the car and the tumble dryer and my tools, and the other half has been, well, where I am, is a studio. It's decked out as it's plastered, there's heating, lighting, like I need heating today, no air conditioning, carpets, double glazing, and a little mini radio studio, because I'm an enormous nerd. And so... that's where this show gets recorded from, but with a flat roof and big windows. It is baking in here today. So let's move on to... before I start, thank you to myev.com for helping make this show. They are based in the US, and I'm sure in their summer, they get pretty hot. But, when you're used to hot temperatures, you have things like, air conditioning. So today I just went and sat in the car for a little bit and did some errands and turned the air conditioning on max. There'd be no point having air conditioning in England for the 2 weeks of crazy weather that we get. But right now it is baking. Oh my goodness, I would love some air conditioning in the house. Well, 3 days left to buy a Tesla if you want the current rate of federal tax credit. The federal government provides a tax credit of $7,500 for the first 200,000 buyers of an EV from any maker. After they've sold their 200,000th, it then cuts in half and then it's not about the number of cars, it's a pure time limit. So that happened on the 1st of Jan. So the 6 months, it goes down to half, and then halves again for the next 6 months. Then it goes completely for Tesla buyers. The federal tax credit also has been triggered by GM, and the others have got a long way to go catching up. So a reminder, 3 days away from the end of the month. Does that count? I think you have to take delivery of your Tesla to have it registered. Maybe that can happen. Maybe if you buy one and you buy an inventory car and you're like, boom, I found the spec, get it in my driveway, let's get the discount. Well, there have been multiple clues over the last few weeks and months as to why Tesla is planning to go their own way when it comes to battery cell production without their longtime partner Panasonic. Firstly, if you go way back, look at the Panasonic statement about their happiness of working with Toyota and being a battery supplier in the future for them, for their soft hybrids, their don't call them self-charging cars. Also, Elon Musk wasn't throwing shade, but saying recently, look, Panasonic still haven't hit capacity at the Nevada Gigafactory. They've got some way to go there, but he said between 70 and 80% was his quote. And so normally those kind of things get discussed privately. The big players like that don't air their dirty laundry in public, but that's been happening. So that's been a bit of a clue that I've noticed and just sort of filed away in the back of my mind. When those relationships are rock solid, those kind of things don't really get said. Well, a little while ago, I also tweeted a screenshot of Tesla's jobs page, vacancies page, and it was looking for specialists in battery cell logistics. Now, that's the kind of job you would expect Panasonic, the cell maker, to be looking for, not the company that Panasonic supply, unless there was something else going on. And also at the recent Investor Day, when Elon Musk and JB Straubel, his right-hand man in terms of making the batteries and energy at Tesla, were sort of stifling giggles and looking at each other when they were talking about their future plans and the Maxwell acquisition, which, if you didn't know, Tesla have bought company that develops battery technology. And so all of those things led to podcasts like Ryan McCaffrey's Ride the Lightning, like Rob Maurer on Tesla Daily, and the websites like Inside EVs and Electrek that have all more recently been saying, actually, look, this is kind of getting really obvious now. Well, today, CNBC put some more meat on the bones, if you like. Not to offend the vegans that are listening. I'm off the meat as well, by the way, in case you thought I was making a sideways comment. Tesla is developing the means to manufacture its own battery cells, according to 5 current and recent employees, something that the EV maker has relied on Panasonic to do since the companies signed their extensive exclusive partnership way back in 2014, wasn't it? Well, Tesla employees conduct some of the battery cell manufacturing research at something called a skunkworks lab, which is kind of the name given to when a big tech company has somewhere off-site or off-limits to most people where the forward-thinking R&D and all that kind of stuff is done. Apple are a good example. I've read Steve Jobs biographies and many books on Apple as well. Used to be a huge Apple fanboy. I was there buying the iPhone on the first day it was released. Yeah, I was one of those, I'm sorry. And I was like a massive tech nerd. And so Apple have, Johnny Ive and his industrial design team, for instance, a handful of people in a massive company have security clearance to go in certain bits of the building. These are the kind of places that I'm talking about with Tesla and their battery cell team. Now, their building is a facility on Cato Road, just a few minutes from their car plant in Fremont, California, where the cars are actually made. Employees in Tesla's R&D teams are now focusing on designing and prototyping very advanced lithium-ion battery cells, as well as new equipment and the processes that will allow Tesla to produce those cells in ultra-high volumes, the employees and the former employees told CNBC. And moving on to the final story today from Tesla, they are expanding into Eastern Europe. The Ukraine is now being considered as another Eastern European country that they plan to expand into to establish themselves in more geographical markets they're not currently in, reports IB Times. They say that with Tesla entrenched in Western Europe, the only direction left to go, well, that's east. Tesla's finally expanding towards Eastern Europe in response to pleas from a few Tesla owners in those areas. We do know that the first area they'll be going to is the Czech Republic. If you go to the north, if you really head Eastern Europe, by the way, and you start to head towards Russia, well, if you go north, think of somewhere like, this is where I show up my geography being pretty bad, somewhere like Finland, by the way, where the south coast of Finland borders with the northern coast of Russia. Well, yeah, Finland has some supercharging stations right down there on the south coast if you particularly wanted to drive all the way to there. Poland, I know, has some. That's to the west of countries like Belarus, Lithuania, Ukraine. As far as I know, no supercharger network built in those places yet. Just really places in Poland and Hungary have superchargers. So maybe we'll see Tesla, as the cars become more popular in places, they'll know where they're selling their cars, looking to expand their infrastructure as well. Moving on to a couple of stories from BMW. Earlier this week, I told you about BMW's electric car plans. But just to recap, at this week's conference, the Next Gen event, it was held in Munich. Well, BMW unveiled a rather intriguing concept car called the Vision M Next, a 600 horsepower plug-in hybrid that is their vision for what could be a production car in the future. There will be 25 electrified cars from BMW by 2023, that date being brought forward by 2 whole years. And over half of those will be full electric cars. And news that I'd missed earlier in the week, or maybe just the journalists have written it up now. I saw on motor1.com today that one of the senior bosses at BMW told the journalists in a journalist kind of roundtable session when they were asking about diesel that he thinks diesel has a future, that we'll still be going to the diesel pumps in 20 years' time, that in 2040, BMW's diesels will still be around and you'll still be buying them and you'll still be buying diesel in 20 years' time. I'm sure that there was a press person somewhere, a PR officer, a communications person, just wanting to bury themselves in the ground at that point, because all of the outward-facing communications from all the big automakers, whether they believe it or not, and I am inclined to think they do believe it, is that electrification is the future. So when somebody at board level, so senior from BMW, sits down with journalists and goes, "Oh no, diesel, double thumbs up, it's great. 20 years' time we'll be queuing up at the diesel pumps." You just think, oh my goodness, that's a bunch of PR work we've now got to undo. But also, you know what? Even if you think it these days, don't say it out loud. Second story from BMW at that same event was, I mentioned to get this earlier in the week as well, but Jalopnik have finally written their story up on what is a 710 horsepower, full electric BMW 5 Series conversion. This really is a not even prototype. This is a one-off piece of research that the BMW engineers have done. They've called it Lucy, as in the girl's name, Lucy. 710 horsepower. It's a one-off sedan that they took the chassis of the 5 Series, a car built for a fossil platform, and stuffed in there somehow batteries and the motors and all that kind of stuff. And it now does 2.8 seconds, 0 to 62 miles an hour. That's 100 kilometers an hour. Only a 45 kilowatt hour battery in this bad boy, but it's not about range. They want to save weight, and even the battery itself is small, but of a technology where they can just bang in hot lap after hot lap after hot lap. How many? Well, 10 laps of the test circuit, and then they have to recharge it. But that's not the point. The point was they're saying we're researching performance, doing hot laps, not having the batteries fade. It's a smaller pack. They're saving weight. They've retrofitted this onto a 5 Series platform. A bit of boot space taken up, by the way. 2 motors on the rear. So each motor operates one of the rear wheels independently. So you do some kind of funky torque vectoring stuff with that for traction control. And then 1 motor up the front. Now, what they have put in the front of this BMW 5 Series, though, is a piece of production car. This is a 220 pound or 100 kilo cast aluminium case. Inside this case is going to house the motor and the gearbox of what will be BMW's 5th gen technology, the 5th gen drive unit. They've called it HEAT, heat. But actually, what they're doing to cool it is rather funky. They're cooling it down with both water and oil, and the drive unit design is going to be used on all future BMWs. Things like the X3 that's being electrified. The iX3. Although actually I should say not the Mini. The Mini, of course, owned by BMW, that is using the old BMW i3 tech. It's not using, so even that's not even out yet. And then when it finally comes out and hits the market, being made in Oxford in the UK, not going to have the latest tech in it, but I've mentioned this before and it kind of frustrates me. BMW saving this 5th gen technology for the other cars they're making, the i4, etc. This unit, by the way, they have been stress testing, and at the moment it has a maintenance-free target of 186,000 miles, which is 300,000 kilometres maintenance-free. The news that every franchised BMW dealership that makes all its money from servicing really didn't want to hear. Let's move on to some news about renewables, and GE Renewable Energy announced today that it has a new 12 megawatt, soak up that number for a second, a 12 megawatt wind turbine, and it's currently entering its testing phase right here in this country, funnily enough, the windiest place in Europe. It's going to be taken to an offshore renewable energy site in the north called Blythe. It's a 12 megawatt offshore wind turbine, goes into service. They all go into service in 2021, but for now, a year's testing. It's got a 220 meter rotor. Wowzers, it stands 260 metres tall, and this one single turbine, of which there'll be many, can power 16,000 homes a year on its own. A quote from John Laval, who is the president and CEO of the offshore wind business of GE. He said this, and I quote, "We want to bring the most powerful offshore wind turbine to the world's largest offshore wind market and contribute with our technology to support the UK offshore wind sector and the goal it has of generating 30 gigawatts by 2030, end quote. Yeah, we are the windiest country in Europe. There should be so much more wind power, both onshore and offshore. And I mentioned it recently. Somebody picked up and went, "Why are you so against offshore wind?" Because I was saying that onshore wind doesn't happen, and it's frustrating because of the politicians. Because a lot of the places that people... Anyway, let's not go into it. It's a vote loser. If you put big wind turbines and people don't like the look of them, it's a vote loser, right? So you bury them offshore, people can't see them. It's quite frustrating because onshore wind is much cheaper to install. Let's not go around this roundabout again. I mean, there are other things, like the land has a drag effect on wind, which is why you have to make them taller. So you put them out to sea, actually, and the sea has less of a drag effect than the land. There's different things like the way that they behave. So actually, you can offshore, you can do different things with wind turbines, but just the cost of putting them offshore, have them onshore, have them where you want, have them in my back garden. I think they look gorgeous. I want to power my EV on clean, green, renewable energy. That means that we leave some sort of legacy for our children and our grandchildren that didn't just involve mining and burning. I want to talk about the debate going on in the US right now, because obviously I'm thousands of miles away. So again, if you can offer me insight into this, I'd love to hear from you. Car makers versus the oil and gas industry. General Motors is one of a fleet of car makers seeking the extension of a tax break that has for a decade now helped sustain the sale of cars that need no gas to run or little gas to run, says the Washington Post today. What's been triggered is an intense lobbying in the US. On one side, the automotive sector that's got together, like GM and Tesla and Nissan, and said, please keep this incentive going to help people buy new EVs. On the other side, the oil and gas lobby. And Derek Morgan is the Senior Vice President of the American Fuel and Petrochemical Manufacturers. He said today that he's met with dozens and dozens of lawmakers openly admitting the oil and gas industry is lobbying hard to get rid of the tax break for people to buy clean, green cars in the US. And proponents of the credit argue that the oil industry already gets enough subsidies. Yes, the oil and the fossil fuel industry in North America is the biggest subsidized industry in the country. And before you go, yeah, but not above, like healthcare or something. Yeah, of course. yeah. No, but not above education. Yes, of course. Yeah. Okay, right, I'll give you those. But not above defense. I mean, the US spends a lot on defense. I mean, they're not subsidizing the fossil fuel industry more than they spend every year on their entire defense budget. Yes, they are. Big job to do, eh? Very powerful industry. And so we'll see which way this plays out, but more news today about this. And again, I'm so far away from it that sometimes I seem a little detached from the whole thing, but it's just so huge. Countries like Canada, states like California, I know, trying to push and do their own thing. And I'm not immune to seeing both sides of it. Somebody who buys a $130,000 Tesla P100DL, do they need money off a car? No. I mean, are they going to take it, a tax credit, if they can? Of course. Do they need it? No, you need to be incentivizing, in my opinion, things that make the biggest difference first, like China's done with buses and trucks and taxis and vans. That's where they put all of their focus to begin with. Places like Shenzhen with over 16,000 pure EV buses made by companies like BYD. So much so, there are no fossil-gobbling buses left in the public transport sector. And so, yes, we need incentives. Maybe we need to look about where they go. Do people who buy Teslas need money off a car? Do they need it? No. Do they want it? They'll take it. I would. But what can we do to make sure that those vehicles that run all of the time, buses that run 24 hours a day, trucks that run on 2 or 3 driver shifts, taxis that'll do 500,000 miles, and particularly taxis that are spewing out diesel around the schools and hospitals in our cities and towns. Let's try and get those to EV. And then, when you're in a taxi and you're in an EV taxi, then maybe someone will say, oh, this is nice. It's quiet. It's vibration free. I've heard about these electric cars. Maybe I'll try one. Right, final story today. This is a German company that makes batteries, and it's great news for an area that's had it really, really tough, and that is Detroit, USA. With almost 30 years' experience in battery tech, a German company called Akasol is developing and manufacturing high-performance lithium-ion batteries now for American buses, American commercial vehicles, American trains, industrial vehicles, and even the marine sector. They've announced plans today to open a new production facility in the Detroit area of Michigan, USA. USA. The new facility will generate considerable investment, 200 jobs, and the location of the site will ensure that the customers to that company now comply with the Buy American Act, which is, I gather, a regulation that probably does what it says on the tin, the Buy America Act. It dictates how much must be purchased from locally produced battery systems. Awesome, well done them, and well done Detroit as well for reinventing it. And I don't know how bad things got, and they still are there with the auto industry struggling, but just fantastic news from so many people have had such a hard time with the decline of the auto industry in that place that any investment is just super, super good. And I'm so happy that it comes from the EV sector. A reinvention, hopefully the first of many more jobs. Let's talk about our question of the week this week. Thanks to myev.com. They've set us this question. With EVs getting so good now, do EVs have anything left to prove? Let me know your answer. Email me hello@evnewsdaily.com. If you want to leave a comment on Facebook or the YouTubings, you're more than welcome to. There are 228 patrons of the podcast now, with Robin's extra generous support as an exec producer. And all the exec producers and above can see their names in the show notes every single day. Thank you as always to Phil Roberts from Electric Future, Brad Crosby, a premium partner, and a third name to add to the list next week as well. And they're looking forward to answering your EV questions on this podcast. There are 510 previous shows to get for free wherever you get your podcasts from. If you hit subscribe, if you're not already a subscriber, I'm guessing most people are. But if you're not, you can hit the subscribe button and get the show first and free and automatically every single day. And if you want to leave a little review, that would be amazing. Say hi on the socials by searching EV News Daily. Have a wonderful day. I will catch you tomorrow. And remember, there's no such thing as a self-charging hybrid.